All right, I will call to order the May meeting of the Glendale Planning and Historic Preservation Commission. We'll begin, as always, by noting for the record that we do have a quorum. We're missing one member, but that still leaves us with a quorum. Continuing, approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Members of the commission, you've had a chance to review those. What is your pleasure?
Do we have the first name of Mr. Parrish?
Oh, I do not. I did notice.
Well, then
I
can't-
emailed it.
Oh, did you? Okay, I didn't see it. Okay.
What is
I'll,
it?
I'll revise that with Mr. Parrish's name.
I was gonna say for the record, it was Glenn Parrish.
Glenn, okay.
Glenn.
One N or two N's?
2.
Thank you.
Okay, so
thank you.
with that change, I'll recommend approval.
I will second.
Second, any further discussion, members of the commission? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, let's move on to new business. I'm going to skip over the old business, which is the chicken coops and the historic guidelines, in favor of our new business so that we can handle those quickly and then devote as much time as we need to the other amendments. I understand, David, that our first application is he's not able to attend
That's
the
correct.
driveway on East Fountain?
That's right.
All right. I think it's appropriate that we defer action. He understands that was the end result of his absence. So I would entertain a motion to defer till the next month.
I'll make that.
Motion to defer. Okay.
Motion and a second to defer. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. David, the second item of new business, the signage at the at 309 East Sharon, that has been withdrawn?
You all are going to start wondering why you come to these meetings. Yes, I actually had a conversation with the applicant. The proposed signage was above our maximum permitted height for building signage. So they're going to reassess their designs and then come back probably next month with something more appropriate.
Is that the round sign that they proposed was too high?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay,
So.
gotcha.
Okay,
Yep.
All right, so that was, do you have an email to that effect from them, or at least can you follow up with them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I spoke directly with them this afternoon, and they will. They'll be back with a more appropriate design when they're
Okay.
ready.
All right, I don't think if it's the action of the applicant, we don't need to take
I
any
don't. I
action
think it's
ourselves.
safe to say that I'll won't be appearing.
Okay. Very good. Well, then we only have one other new item of new business. That's the request of Timothy Kilgore, 200 East Sharon, for porch alterations. Mr. Kilgore.
I'm up by default.
Yeah. You scared him away.
The key plan on the first page in the upper right-hand corner is probably a good guide. It's a potpourri assortment of small projects, starting with 2 roofing projects. Number 1 is a re-roof of the sunrooms, the southwest corner stacked sunrooms. It was the pre-existing roof was similar to what I've replaced it with. And that is an original metal roof of some metal. I'm not sure what it was in bad condition, but it had been re-roofed repeatedly, including with a membrane and then multiple layers of liquid rolled roofing through the years. I'm not sure how old that, it's not original, of course, but I didn't change the roof in any way except to make some improvements as I did this. And it's shown, at least the front elevation shows on the left-hand side of that first page.
can we see that? Oh, can't
On the
really
left-hand
see it.
side was the previous drawings that were done for the remodeling of those sunrooms about 10 years ago. But the work is limited to the roofing at that top level. It's a flat roof. I added 2-inch polyiso insulation just to improve the thermal performance of the roof. And as a flammable, acceptable but flammable material and compressible, I like covering it in my work with a dense board, which is a fire-resistant fiberglass mat covered gypsum core, minimal material, but it protects the insulation for walking on it, as well as a good fire protection. And then finally, a single ply membrane white roofing, which you cannot see, sheet product TPO, and I'm not going to attempt the chemical name that the TPO stands for. And then at the perimeter, there is, that you can't see, there is a, by virtue of the addition of the 2-inch rigid insulation, I get some depth to a gutter. It previously had simply shed minimally to the perimeter and worked its way to downspout. I got more of a trough now because of the 2-inch depth that I added with the insulation. And that is a copper box gutter. The edging, the flashing that you can see is copper, and then the new downspout is copper. Going on to another roofing project, number 2, on the right-hand side is the front L facing the south. Box gutter is nearing the end of its useful life, is the kind way of putting it, and it was metal painted. It will be copper as well when our friend Lola Bolanos is available, who's become quite popular in the village, does fine work. He'll be doing that as well as the downspout is copper. Any questions about the roofing?
I'm not even sure that needs to come in front of us, does it, David? Because we can't see it, and it's replacement in kind.
So the flat roof, because it is an existing membrane roofing and being replaced with membrane roofing, but the replacement of the gutter, because you are changing from is it an unknown metal? Is that also a polite way of saying
that is, yeah.
Yeah, it's better to come before and
Yeah. Okay.
be seen.
And
And he's got additional work as well.
I'm here anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
But it is an improvement, not just a replacement, and I like saying that. The other is, again, an improvement going to copper, but it's the same form. It's a modified Yankee box gutter with downspout. All the appropriate edging. The flashing will be better than what was there, I believe, extended farther. But pretty straightforward, both of those projects. As you see on the upper right-hand corner, again, the key plan, and then goes to some brickwork on grade, essentially. North is to your left here, so this is oriented 90 degrees from what that little plot plan showed. Number 3 is the existing brick walkway, which I'm simply covering. They went at a diagonal. I guess you might. A lot of people prefer that. I think I like a more straightforward, less cutting herringbone, I guess you would call it, or a basket weave. 2 bricks one way, 2 bricks the other way, alternating throughout the plane. But I showed us 2 options, and it's a matter of getting prices to see how big the difference is. I'd like to put in a concrete pad. That's option A or B, I forget which. Put in a concrete pad and then use thin brick tile. They're still clay product, but look like brick as the topping, the finish on it.
What's your other option if you don't do that?
Traditional full brick unit on sand bed.
And sand.
Yeah. And part of the problem are the trees. I don't want to hurt the trees. I'm afraid I'm going with the concrete. I'm going to be cutting into some roots. So it's a judgment call once we start doing some grading. I have the brick. It matches the house. It's a nice mixture of light and dark, and very, very close at least.
There's a product that can be mixed with the sand that'll keep it in place.
Yes.
Keeps it, firms it up, and you'll be happy if you do it.
I've talked to a walk-by contractor who had been doing some work back off of Coral, stopped by and talked about that as well. When he gave me a price for concrete, I said, we're not going to do that. And we'll see. But yeah, makes it denser, less deterioration.
Yeah, and you don't track it.
Say again?
You won't track it in to the house and all that stuff.
And that's pretty straightforward too. It follows the footprint of the existing, except for the bump out to the north at the front lamp. one of the traditional, formerly gas lamps, but putting a bench there, so I provide a little bump out, as you can see. And that simply leads to the existing concrete stairs that I came for permit last time. That is also being covered with brick. The second, again, similar, covering existing with brick, is the side porch facing Willow. That's in the upper left-hand corner there. And it's simply a matter of following the existing footprint and adding, similar to the stair that I proposed for the front porch, vertical soldier course of full brick at the riser of the 3 risers, and then a brick tile for the remainder, the flat portion. And I don't know what, to tell you the truth, I don't know what the existing porch does now, but I will make it so that it slopes minimally away from the house, especially considering the weather the past couple of weeks. Pretty good idea. In doing that, by the way, I will be getting into base trim on the columns and at the pilasters at the house, trim around the doorway. And I will replace those base elements, not anything else. And it'll be a matter of cut. It will not have if we were to keep the existing, we would be undercutting it and reducing the height. It wouldn't look right. It wouldn't be substantial enough. I'll repeat the dimension that is existing, but it'd be raised slightly because of the pavers. That's it, I think.
Looks good, Tim. Anyone?
Yeah. If everybody came with this complete design, our life would be much easier. Thank you, Tim.
I asked David, do we need to talk about it? And yeah, he said no.
And
Is that a wood trim around the base of those?
It's existing wood trim, and I'll probably, as I did on the porch, go to a wood facsimile, a PVC cellular, lasts forever. Don't need to paint it theoretically, and it's nice because of the proximity to a surface, your rain, backsplash, etc. And it won't look any different. If it did look any different than the existing columns, I'd either resheathe the columns or paint the PVC, and that's a nice. It's not the shiny PVC. It's a matte finish that can remain as is, which is white, and that's all it's available in for trim purposes. Or you can paint it.
I have a question. Tim, did you say that your existing walk was a herringbone brick?
I'm sorry. I may.
There it is.
Yeah.
What you would call that I would call it a herringbone. I think is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. How old do you think that walk is?
I have absolutely no idea. A lot of it's been replaced in the past. You can see the maybe the different phases of repairs. Some of the brick they're different. You can tell they're a different unit, but there's also an existing patio around the left side that's deteriorated. That may come next. But I don't have any confidence that it's original, if that's what you're getting at.
Well, I'm just wondering. I mean, I haven't actually thought about the history of brick pavers and what patterns were used when. But when was your house built?
1856.
Yeah. So, I'm just thinking that if it is original or pretty old, that it would be nice to do something similar, or in character.
Is the side patio also herringbone?
I guess I would argue, just based on my preference, that it's not out of character to do what I would do, and I don't have any confidence that it's the original. I think this is this is a more popular pattern, don't you think?
More what?
Well,
Popular pattern. I mean,
my parents' house had the sort of the square type brick paving. It was a 1920s house, so I'm not sure how far that goes back.
I'll do this. I can do some research on it, see if I can find out something, and I would welcome anything from you in that regard. Yeah, I would find it interesting and maybe compelling if we can make the case that that's original.
Or from that, if maybe that's when that was popular,
Yeah.
Just
even if it's not
Yeah.
original.
But again, I wouldn't say that what I'm proposing, that's a very it sort of goes with my personality, which is very plain. But it's less cutting of brick too. I find that attractive. All these walkways deteriorate around partial bricks generally. They fall away more easily. There's less if it's mortar, there's less mortar holding it there.
Are you gonna do an edging like that, or are you gonna do a metal edging? What are you gonna do on yours?
Metal edging.
Good question.
Yep.
Metal
Well,
edging?
No, there's nothing there now. I think the roots
Oh,
are holding it
The
in.
photo shows
brick. It shows
brick.
Your
brick.
brick, your brick
Shows
is holding
brick.
it in.
I'm sorry, you're right. I take
Yeah.
it back. We have brick all around the house, and it varies what they've done with it.
But you're gonna use a metal edging.
I'm going to use a metal edge, yes.
Just a comment. I just Googled herringbone brick pattern. It started in the Roman Empire, but said it was very popular in the 1900s.
And then I had asked earlier if the side porch was also herringbone match. You said you'd be
I'm
coming
sorry-
back
I'm sorry.
for that project also.
I'm sorry,
You
say
said
again.
a side porch, meaning a patio. Sorry,
It's,
side
it's similar to
patio.
what I've proposed here. It's also right angle.
But is it
rectilinear.
currently rectilinear or
There's
is it
nothing there.
currently?
It's bare concrete.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
That's it right there. Is it the picture on the screen? The one
I'm
you're
sorry?
covering? The picture on the screen?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's it.
Is it possible to rotate that, David?
No, that
So
rotating
that's
the other
also
way.
herringbone
That
match,
looks very,
the walkway.
very steep.
I would lean towards doing something in that,
Same.
similar, because even if it's not original to 1850, it could have acquired significance
Yeah.
just by
If-
being
if-
there.
If we try to argue that is original or more appropriate, the same brick that has not weathered well, it's hard to say depending on how old it is, but to the left, that is to the east of the house, there's a large patio, at least 20 by 20, that's greatly deteriorated, and it's the pattern that I'm proposing.
So it's probably later.
Pardon?
It's probably later, right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
He said it hasn't weathered well, so who
Mhm.
knows whether it's later or earlier.
What was interesting when we took the porch off was you could see something that was very old, and it was not the configuration that is there now. That was there probably for 100 years. But there's no telling if it was original either. You can see from flashing and paint a different, it was a gabled front porch versus this hipped shallow slope.
Everybody's Googling over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
yeah.
looking at different pattern.
I appreciate
There's just as many,
Yeah.
if you go and look at pictures, there's just as many. I think this is a personal preference thing, and I don't think we should be imposing we can have our desires. Everybody has a personal desire, right?
I'm not a big fan of the Roman Empire, by the way.
I agree that it's a personal preference, and it's, you could use either style and it would be fine.
Right. Is that the form of a motion?
Yep. I would move that we accept the proposal, and we give the homeowner the choice of pattern on the walkway and how the walkway is built with either a concrete base or a sand base.
All right, motion, is there a
I'll
second?
second it.
All right, motion second. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address this application? Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. You're more than welcome to stick around. We're going to talk about chickens next. All right, let's move on to what has been classified as old business. We are going to reopen a public hearing on the proposed amendment to the Glendale zoning code relative to the harboring of chickens. David, you've provided us with a memorandum.
Yep.
I'm hoping that you would give us a summary of your conclusions and your recommendations, and we'll take it from there.
Certainly. So the memorandum that I circulated to the commission has 3 points. The first is, I think, to no one's surprise, that the proposed amendments be recommended to council for approval, but we'll get there. The second is addressing a point of conversation. Actually, both of the points are addressing conversation from the April meeting. The first is the grandfathering of existing structures. This came up. There is a difference in the way that typically a zoning code item like this would be enforced if it's an existing structure, and that is a result of the Chapter 94 language, which is the property maintenance language in the code, and the full draft was attached to this memo for everyone's review. That Chapter 94 language will be reviewed and considered by council at their meetings in conjunction with this Chapter 154 language that planning is looking at right now. But the short version is that because the Chapter 94 language requires compliance with the zoning code for chicken facilities, that any facility that exists currently would essentially not have grandfathering capability, but would instead be required to come into compliance. Now, it has been discussed in the Laws Committee where this chicken ordinance began that there would be an opportunity, whether it's 60, 90, 120, some period of time, days, for property owners who have chicken facilities to bring them into compliance, so before enforcement began. So that's council's decision and consideration on that enforcement and delaying that enforcement.
Could they
but
get a variance also?
they could also get a variance. So if it's something that is too difficult or too burdensome to relocate it, they could go for a variance as well. So that would be part of council's deliberation on Chapter 94 is delaying potential enforcement on that section. The next piece of conversation was related to the height of the two structures, chicken coops and chicken runs. I'll be honest to the commission here that I didn't get too heavy into the conversation of minimum heights for structures, simply because the way that our code currently is written for accessory structures, a maximum height of 1.5 stories, and then coops have a maximum height of 10 feet, which is less than that. The goal here, in the way that Chapter 94 is written, which requires screening from neighboring properties, is that the goal of that, as I understand it, and as the committee who worked on this understands it, is to separate the animals from the adjoining neighbor, not necessarily the top of any kind of chicken coop or run. So if there's a roof or kind of the walls extend above a fence or a hedge line, then that wouldn't necessarily pose a detriment such as the actual chickens would. So it's something to be considered. I think that the existing language of 10 feet for a coop is suitable based on public comment that I had heard and the committee had heard, Laws Committee had heard. There is no height restriction on a run except for that 1.5 stories. That might be considered as a potential addition to the code, but I think for the purposes of setting a minimum height, it really does come down to the preference of the property owners to what they want their facilities to look like and how they want them to function. So that summarizes the points for that item. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. But
So the coop could be 10 feet.
Correct.
But the run could be 1.5 stories.
correct.
Why wouldn't the run be 10 feet?
We can absolutely make the run 10 feet or 8 feet, and
Yeah, it makes
It-
more sense to have it consistent.
maximum height of whatever it needs to be for access.
Yeah, I believe it should, I would make it 10.
10.
Yeah, story and a half.
Yeah.
I don't even know what a run looks like. It's just chicken wire, isn't
A box.
That's
is-
right, it
Yeah,
would.
basically a fenced-in, boxed-in area.
I agree, a maximum height is in order for the run as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You think 10 feet is appropriate for that as
I
well?
don't see why 8
Yes.
foot wouldn't work myself.
Yeah, 'cause my understanding is oftentimes coops are put off the ground for a number of reasons. But the run is on the ground. I'm with you, Bob. I think 8 would be
8
plenty.
would be fine.
Because then somebody
my
can
opinion.
walk through it. We don't have any
Yeah.
10-foot people in the village who have chickens.
And the setback is what, 10 feet off the property line?
Yes.
Yeah.
That applies to the coop and to the run?
Yes.
Is that in here, or is that just for
It is.
Yes, it
accessory
is.
use? I didn't,
I
It
think
is.
we should
Okay,
go
there it
for-
is.
for the run.
I agree.
okay. David, there was some talk last month about the construction, the type of construction, materials of construction
Mhm.
for the coops and for the runs.
Yes.
In particular, there was talk about a plastic roof. Somebody mentioned a plastic roof.
Yes.
Did you give any thought to that?
I think it's in there. isn't it?
We can certainly strike any material. Of course, Planning Commission would, if the structure does exceed 120 or 150 square feet, that 150, that they would have you would have the ability to regulate the material. For those who are outside of a historic district, plastic is a viable material, and there are quite a few chicken facilities that are outside of the historic district. So I don't know, because the existing chicken facilities, which is a silly phrase anyway, but those would have to be brought into compliance, I think, to require those that have plastic roofs now to change to wood or metal, which would be more expensive, might be a slight burden. But I think for the historic district, the commission has the ability to review the materials of the proposed coop or run and offer approval or denial of.
And we don't know if it's gonna be a flat roof or a peaked roof or what, right?
It depends on, it depends
So,
on.
Yeah, I'm imagining a flat roof, I wouldn't care if they're plastic or whatever, but
Mhm.
if it's a peaked roof, that could be a factor.
Yeah, I've seen a whole mess of different kinds of constructions. Now for runs, I think are typically flat roofs, because they're essentially chicken wire boxes. But for coops, I've seen them, they look like little cottages, and I've seen they look like, plastic sheds, yeah.
Let me not cut anybody off, but let me see if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to address this request. Yeah, come to the podium so we can hear you, and please give your name.
John McCoy, 151 West Sharon. As far as the run goes, the only thing I would want to say as far as the height goes, some coops are built with the run all as one structure. So if the coop is going to be up to 10 foot, and if someone were to do a solid structure, you would have to move the roof line. So I would only want to bring that into consideration of leaving it all as 10 foot, because like he was talking about, most runs are going to be 6 or 8 foot tall when you buy them, and they're just fencing. But if someone builds a purpose-built structure, I think the roof line should stay the same.
Okay.
I don't see it as a real problem having it go from 10 foot to 8 foot, because your run is just gonna run right into the building where the entrance, where the doorway is for the
You're
chicken.
right, but it's just the way a lot of, if you go and just go to a
Prefabricated.
prefabricated building, you can go down to any shed building facility, and they'll have these on the lot, and they're all one solid roof line
For the coop.
for the coop and the run, because it's just a solid roof line. The coop is one section, then there's a wall with the door, and the rest is just fencing material.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that it's one continuous roof with 2 separate sections.
And what is the roof made out of on those?
So some you'll have corrugated metal roofing or shingle roofing. Every now and again you'll see corrugated plastic, but typically if you're buying it from a shed manufacturer, it's going to be either metal roofing or shingle.
And that'll be a flat roof on the run and a peaked roof?
Peak roof all the way across.
Oh, peak roof everywhere.
Yeah, all the way across. Now you
That's
can
why
get
you
some
wanted
with
it
a shed
too high.
style roof,
Mhm.
just like you could any other shed. And then with just a typical pop-up run, we have a peaked roof, and that's the way it comes. Tractor Supply. It's a 10-foot by 10-foot run with a 6-foot man door, and it's a peaked roof. Just as reference, since you guys were discussing that.
How tall is the roof on the one from Tractor Supply?
So the roof is probably about 7 to 7.5 foot tall at the peak. The door that you enter is 6 foot tall, and that's also the wall height.
I understand it now more that you said it's peaked on the run too.
Yeah.
Why, how it would tie into the.
Into the
To the other
building,
one,
yeah.
yeah.
So it just brings it across, and it helps with the watershed to bring it away from them. And then the only other thing I would like to ask, jumping back to the grandfathering, because I was a little, where we left off with the last meeting, it seemed like we would be getting grandfathered for old structures, and I wasn't quite sure with what I heard there.
Yeah, so because of the way that
Kind of attractive.
the planning commission section of 154, the zoning code, interacts with the property maintenance code section, that you would have to comply with the zoning code in order to comply with the property maintenance code.
Okay.
So you would have either that time period the council would designate to come into compliance, to move what you need to move, or change the size, whatever that is, or you could pursue a variance and get that kind of essentially a special exception.
Okay.
Is what that is. That says that your property configuration requires you to do this a certain way, or whatever other hardships conditions might exist
Okay.
that would require you to do it a certain way.
Okay, yeah, because I was curious, because our building is a dual-purpose building. It's all their lives, all their feed, their bedding, it's all storage. And so ours is a 94-foot coop, but it's half storage, half their coop. And it's within a normal shed building that you can just put without a permit. And so that's where I was at with it. It's a small enough structure that you can typically have without a permit. It's a dual-purpose building for their needs, and it's all self-contained. That way you're not going from building to building.
And to give some context on that, one of the things we were talking about in laws committee about drafting this ordinance we had some, I forget what the exact number was, but it was fairly large for the original proposed square footage of a coop. But there was some conversation about how maximum amount of space per bird, and they don't necessarily want to be all spread out. They want to be on top of each other, that kind of a thing. So I think for dual purpose structures, if there are residents that have those, they might have a particular issue with conforming with this zoning code. But the way that this draft is written is to address those that are pure single use chicken coops. They're not intended to be dual purpose. So that would be something that might need to be.
Well, if it's a dual purpose, could you look at it and say this portion of the building is where they coop? This is a portion of the building where it's used as a run, and then go back into the figures that.
And altogether, it still can't be over 150.
That's correct.
Yeah.
No, just to ask you a question about it. You have your actual coop building, and with the walls and the roof and the whole thing.
Yes.
That's what's you said.
So
about 98?
the coop itself, imagine as your normal shed.
Sure.
It is a 94 square foot, and then there's a hole on the backside, the long side of the building, that then connects to our run.
Okay.
And run is a 10 by 10.
Okay.
And then inside the building, it's kind of interesting, just the way they were saying birds want to be on top of each other. Having a bigger space inside will not change that. They have roosting bars. They will go to the roosting bars and stay. The extra space inside, that's for our convenience. They'll get up, they'll go to the nesting boxes, they'll go outside. But they'll all get up on their roost. We have a long bar. They all sit on one side together. It's just like a room here. You guys need so much space. You have a little bit extra. It's not gonna decrease the health of the bird by having a larger coop.
Yeah. Well, I think you just made my point that the roosting section could be designated as the coop, measured.
It is, and that would be amazing, something like that, because like in ours, the roosting bars are only in one corner.
Okay.
And that's also where most of the mess, where most of their fecal matter and everything lands. Inside the coop is where they roost at night. So underneath, that contains where the area, most of the area cleanup is. And you can put sand there, you can scoop it out. It's a lot easier, a lot cleaner.
So just to, and not, I don't mean to, you're here. Congratulations.
Yeah.
We're going to ask you
Yeah,
questions.
please.
Your building, the
Yes,
shed,
yes.
it is subdivided in a way with the, or is it one just like a
So-
like a typical shed, right? You walk
Yeah.
in and it's
You walk in
to the walls.
So you walk in, your door's center.
Yeah.
On either side, you have two slide up windows facing
Okay.
forward, two barn door windows that fold out, and an air vent on the right hand side.
okay.
You walk straight open, it's clear open all the way around.
Okay.
We have their feeders off to the left, nesting boxes along this wall,
Okay.
food containers, extra bedding stacked up.
Mhm.
Now, right now, because when we bought it, it was someone else's, they built it on their farm. It has a long roosting bar. We don't like that. We're about to take it out, and we're gonna do about a 4-foot section on the right-hand side.
Okay.
And it's gonna have a 3 tiers of roosting bars. It'll take about a 4x4 area, maybe 4x5 area on the floor. And that's where they'll sleep. That's where most of their feces will be. Easy to clean, smells not a problem, protects us, not having to spend as much on bedding. And it's better for them. That contains them, but now they can still go to their nesting boxes. We can, when you have kids, you now have an area inside where you can have your brooder instead of having to keep them in your house. You have a brooder, you can safely raise your chicks. And so it allows for you to take care of your animals in a lot of different ways in that area that if you're limited to a 45 square foot area, you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So the 150 feet, that includes the run and the.
Correct.
Well, then.
No, your run is 150.
Yeah, that's
Oh, I'm
just
sorry.
the
It's
run.
48.
That's
Waiting
just
for
the run.
chickens?
Oh.
No.
The coop is
Yes.
48.
Yes.
Coop is
Good.
48.
Okay.
Expanding it does not negate any of the requirements that it be well maintained, obviously, which is, I think, part of the reason, or the entire reason why this has even come before council and planning commission. Expanding it does not remove the need to keep it clean or reduce odors or noise or any of those nuisance conditions that we are attempting to address by pursuing this. And I don't think making it larger necessarily requires anyone to do anything larger. If they want to have a smaller coop,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
obviously welcome to. I think that I don't think it would be out of order or inappropriate to potentially talk about expanding that footprint to account for structures that are multi-purpose. To what extent is obviously a point of conversation, but
So,
the goal here is to address, the noise and the smell and the
yeah.
poor construction of coops that exist currently in some parts of the village.
I left my at home, so the square feet is what square feet?
So currently coops are limited to 48, a footprint of 48,
Okay.
and then the runs are a maximum of 150.
150.
And what is an accessory structure maximum?
750 or half the footprint of the home, whichever is larger. So I would say you'd probably safely say 750.
But without a permit, it's 120 and 150 depending on where you are.
Correct. So
Without
one
permit.
120 permit, 150 planning.
Planning.
Now the permit is, it's dependent on the whether there's a poured base, whether it's on slats or on gravel. Planning commission is, obviously that review. There's no requirement that they build a facility that has to go to planning. You can build a 119 square foot footprint and go on about your way.
And you can only have one accessory structure, right?
I'm not aware of any limitations.
Oh, that's
on
right. I wanted to do that. People wouldn't do it.
That felt like a setup.
I thought somebody could have 5 or 6 in their backyard as long as they're below the minimum and as long as it's not, if they have a
Right.
large enough house.
Right.
And how large is yours? You said
So our run
94?
is about 94.
Your
somewhere
coop
in
is about
there. Yeah,
94?
about
Coop
94.
is 94.
Because when we purchased it, I made sure it would be under that limit of a shed that I can just drop on my property.
And-
Because I kind of
yeah.
figured in my mind, okay, that's an acceptable size of a building that I am allowed to put on my property.
And you have a coop in addition to the,
So it is-
or I mean, you have a run in
A
addition
run.
to the coop.
Yes. So
How big is the run?
it is right now 100 square foot.
100.
It's 10 by 10.
10 by
Okay.
10, yeah.
Now, realistically, I would love to be able to double that, which now with these restrictions you can't, because they tear it up and their run area is really, really important to them and their health, and having a clean run. They take dust baths. That's how they clean themselves. They protect themselves from mites. They need that space. It's more important than anything else. It's like having a dog outside. And so we had originally planned to at least double that, maybe 200 square feet, and just buy another of this same Tractor Supply unit to attach to the side, take out the center portion. Now we will be expanding to at least our max of 150 feet. We'll have to come up with another structure because we can't put a half building on. Does that answer your question? I apologize.
It does, no, you're fine.
How many chickens do you have?
We have 12. We're keeping it at what the proposed maximum is because we don't want to be stuck in a hole. Now, one other thing that I did want to ask about the maximum amount of chickens.
Mm-hmm.
How do I say this politely? As chickens age, if you're using them for eggs, they produce less, and you eventually cycle your chickens.
That's a nice way to recycle.
So, when those things occur,
Yes.
you have to raise your chicks. So, from a production standpoint and providing for your family, you want to be able to have your 12 egg layers, right? But now you have to, say you want to cycle 6. You have 6 egg layers for 6 months, half the year, until your chicks are ready to lay. So realistically, you're down to 6 chickens each year because you're cycling your chicks. Just something I would like everyone to be able to think about when you have animals like this.
I have
Well,
a
the
question.
What's
what's the life cycle of a chicken in general?
So, can you give overall?
Don't know how old they are.
Like you mean from
Get your phone out.
Birth to
rooster
death.
or hen to egg to hatching to death?
Right.
Yeah.
Let's say attach it to death.
Hatching to death.
Mhm.
In captivity, they live about 8 to 10 years.
Thank you.
Their egg production decreases around age 2.5 to 3. And they usually, after hitting 1 year of age, and they have their first molt, which is like they lose their old feathers for winter time and they grow new ones, they also stop producing eggs then because of the life cycle. We get shorter days different.
Thank you.
So the number of chicken issue, that will be a council matter because it's not part of the zoning code conversation that we're having with planning. But council is planning on having 3 reads on this, and there'll be public comment opportunities there.
Because the real,
Definitely.
I guess my real thing is like, if we're allowed to be able to have our chicks while we still have our other chickens, and then
Yeah,
You
very
know,
much. I absolutely understand your question.
Yeah.
There's also
So-
something in the ordinance about not slaughtering birds on site. So what's the alternative?
well, take them off
The
site or
the
Take them to your neighbor's house.
yeah,
I
it's a very
Slaughter.
restrictive thing, especially when you put that in place, and then what are you going to do when your bird gets hurt? Now I'm breaking the law to be able to humanely handle my animal.
I think that the phrase that I will use there is discretion and enforcement. I think slaughter is obviously the
For
correct
sale?
term.
Yeah.
There is a difference.
Euthanasia is different.
There's a difference between flock
Hang 'em up on your
maintenance.
front porch and
There's-
hanging 'em up.
Well, that's exactly my point. There's a difference between flock maintenance and preparing them for
Slaughtering all 12 chickens.
and hanging them up to
Right.
be ready for dinner.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to creating a nuisance condition with the, say, flock maintenance, a polite way of putting it, there's going to be some discretion with enforcement. I think if we come into a situation where a property is obviously slaughtering chickens and creating a mess and creating a nuisance, then there's avenues there. But we're certainly not going on people's property regularly and tagging the birds and making sure they're all still there like last week. So,
Well, no, but maybe we can distinguish between,
the
different types of
The reality is our enforcement will be limited to people who are complaining.
That's
So as long as you don't do it in public, nobody's gonna know,
Right.
okay?
Well, and it's like, we live right next to Amy, and we've had discussions with her, and she likes the way we take care of our chickens. We try very, very hard to give them a good life.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that
Right.
reasonable addresses are concerned.
sure.
Right.
The problem is the way it's written now, you're gonna be out of compliance as far as the size of your coop.
That's one of our biggest worries. I mean, it's not a cheap thing to get a new coop. It's a big
Yeah.
investment.
And I think that might be, I don't know, we should be able to come up with something where if it's a dual use, you can exceed it by 50% or something like that.
Or just how you define what the coop is. If it's just the nesting boxes, that's, to my mind, that's the coop area.
Well, and
Yes, coop is a building.
it is the whole building. Now, something, just an idea, but you have your 120 square foot building that you're allowed to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should be able to have that size building. That has already been addressed as the size building you can have. You have restrictions on how many additional buildings you can already have. Now, in regards to the chicken area, when you get your permit, you have your first inspection, as I believe you said. Maybe it's something like, okay, in this space you have suitable roosting area, suiting nest box area, and I don't understand from a reasonable standpoint why the coop would have to be restricted internally to that space. You're allowed to have that size building.
I agree.
You're utilizing that space.
Differently.
You should be able to
Different.
utilize it any way
Just
you
like
want to.
anyone
as long as-
doing a shed or a garden building or.
Well, right.
We sort of, as we were working through this,
Mm-hmm.
and we researched the chickens and the fact that the chickens like to be close together, and some municipalities restrict the coop size based on number of chickens and then provide a square footage per chicken that's either required or what. But anyway, let me just finish. We started off with a different size coop, and we did all this research, and then it kind of boiled itself down to 48 square feet. David, do you recall what we started?
I am looking that up right now. An early draft.
It seems to me a 10 by 10 isn't too.
An early draft had 100 square feet.
There it is.
So it was not. I think it only was reduced after conversations from folks that said you don't need that much space per
Right.
bird.
Right.
And we did it as a calculation of 12 birds, 4 per bird.
And
But I think most
40.
people will use it the way he's using it. They'll
Right.
have their feed
Well,
there, they'll have their bedding
and-
there, they'll
and-
have all that.
Well,
Well,
I don't-
100 square feet fits 94.
Yeah.
So
But he has a run also.
Well, and they're calculated separately, so
Okay.
there's no maximum
Okay,
square
Okay,
footage.
so,
But
Now,
you can have a
what
coop, you can have a run.
what I would
and-
say is, if you've got someone who has a like a shed, like you're using a shed structure, the run is, again, trying to address the nuisance condition that some chickens might present. The run is where the chickens are more visible. They're out. They're going to the bathroom. They're making noise. Whatever they're doing. Whereas the coop is essentially their nighttime facility.
They're in the coop in bad weather and at night.
Yeah,
That's
and so
about it.
there's very little, as far as I would argue, little exposure when they're inside the coop. Meaning a larger coop doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a bigger nuisance, and you're still limiting the number of birds. So you're.
I think we could easily make it 100 foot.
So I think that, restricting the size of the run makes sense, but I think if there's a possibility of a larger coop that has multiple purposes,
Yeah,
there's some value, I think, in that.
Yeah, you say the coop's 100.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that also, before we scaled it back, I think that was sort of an average of Hamilton County.
It
and
was.
a couple of other neighboring communities, they all had 100 square feet as the coop size.
That's good. That's a good one.
Some
Yeah,
didn't
because-
restrict it. There was one that used their accessory structure size.
Yeah, anybody could get a,
750.
one of those little Amish things that are 100 feet and carve out a half of it and use a part of it as a chicken coop. And,
Yeah.
and so, I think that's a very
I think
reasonable.
100 foot's just fine.
Can I say something?
Sure.
As someone who
Could you give your name? I'm sorry for the record.
I'm sorry, it's Debbie Marsh. As someone who had issues with a neighbor, it's not about the size of the coop or the run. Like, I have no problem with it being
Okay.
that big. It's more about it being taken care of, like you said, the smell, the odor,
Right.
Yeah.
the
let them
structure
run
being
loose.
taken care of. So like, that wouldn't bother me if it was bigger.
Sure.
Because it would be no different than a shed or, you know, the neighbors have trampoline, you could put it, as long as it's taken care of.
And that's, I think, that would be the enforcement. I mean, just speaking truthfully, we would not be out with a tape measure if your run is, or your run's 151 square feet. We're not going to like take your chickens away. But if there is a complaint from a neighbor, if there's an unsanitary condition or whatever, that's when enforcement would really be more aggressive. I think the minimums here or the maximums here are set to assist people in establishing a chicken operation, to use a phrase, not necessarily to say that, if it's 50 square feet, it's heinous compared to 48. So, so then altering that 1F to 100 square feet.
That's what
And
I'm
then
hearing.
the other thing that we didn't deal with yet is the material on the roofing.
Mhm.
We haven't dealt with that.
I've got, just to recap, I've got a max height for the run of 8 feet, and then I've got a max coop square footage or footprint of 100 square feet.
I think maybe we should, if he said that they're prefab and they're 10 feet all the
Oh,
way
yes.
across, we might want to change that to maximum height of 10 feet.
10 feet.
10 feet, yeah.
Be consistent between the two.
We needed him on the whole discussion.
Okay.
I mean, I've been scrolling through and you see them, a lot of them with metal.
Mm-hmm.
You see a few with plastic. You see some of them have shingles, asphalt shingles. I think what we're trying to get away from is people using tarps and
Yes,
things like that.
that's exactly correct.
If I may say, I think something in there for language wise, if you're afraid of the plastic, just put in there, the only acceptable plastic, however you want to word it, is corrugated plastic. It's a formed roof material.
Yeah.
Right.
Like over our run, that's what we've used on our run because we were able to put wood strips underneath, attach it to the wire roof, and now they're dry and safe.
So does it say corrugated
It
plastic?
says rigid plastic.
Yeah, safe.
That's not good enough, I don't think. I think corrugated is better.
Yeah.
Because rigid plastic can be just those flat sheets of plastic.
That's
Yeah. Corrugated plastic.
Are
corrugated.
you in the historic district?
No, ma'am.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people I know one person who I know who had took one of those Little Tykes buildings and turned it into a chicken coop. Right?
I knew somebody had their chickens running
How
around
many
loose all
chickens
over.
do they have?
12 name and a name.
I mean, this is a big one.
Not far
This
from
is
here,
one
though.
it's maybe, 8 foot long by 6 feet wide, but it has plastic panel roofs. And
I surprise the kids when they go in there.
I had hornets in mine growing up, but
Yeah.
I guess chickens would be better. All right, so just to review, changing rigid to corrugated in both instances, both for the coop and the run. Max height of the run at 10 foot and max square footage footprint for a coop at 100 square feet. Okay.
That's what I heard.
So, do we have to vote?
Now, I did have one more question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
In reference to having to block the chicken run, what is going to be considered, blocking the view or disrupting the view? Well, I'm
I
not
don't
sure
think
what the
that's in
language
there.
was.
Screening.
Yeah, so like ours sits out back and kind of
That's not
off in the center of our lot.
There isn't.
We don't have anything about
We
screening.
don't have a
Yeah,
requirement
that's in
for
Okay.
screening.
that's in 94.
Okay.
And that'll get discussed at council.
Okay, so that'll be.
I would say that just to give you an answer tonight would be some, like, it reads here with fencing or by fencing or landscaping.
Okay.
So, some hedges, some tree, I mean, like
Yeah.
an evergreen stuff, like a
Okay.
pine or something. Just something to create visual
Break up the visual
breakup.
pattern.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, folks.
Thanks
I got
for-
that for you.
What's that?
What do you think of that? Chicken coop for sale. It's all plastic.
Wow.
Once it's corrugated, doesn't seem like it would work.
That's cute. Okay.
All right. What's
I mean,
the?
Well,
so under
if
our
it's in
rules, you
a-
couldn't do this.
Since it's not corrugated.
It's not really
Yeah.
a structure, is it?
You're right, it's not corrugated.
We'll cross that one when we get to it.
Did you see it?
Somebody can come to
Well,
you.
See that
Your
We
press.
certainly cannot do that in the historic district.
All right. Is there anyone else in the audience
Yeah,
wish
look
to
at that
address this request?
It looks like it's mobile. It's got
It-
wheels.
Well, it is, and that's one of the things, I mean, one of the things in chickens, I was at somebody's farm, and they have these runs, and they're on wheels, and they move them every few days.
I actually-
Referred to as chicken tractors. And they are awesome.
Well, you bring this up, I actually have another potential revision under 1D where it talks about the coop must be fully enclosed by wire or similar material. That in and of itself is a little unclear. I think a lot of coops would hope have wooden or metal walls,
Right.
like a traditional shed. Would that be something that we could add a similar material requirement for either wood, metal, or corrugated plastic and address? I don't know what, I didn't see that closely enough, but I'm assuming it's
Here.
like a plexiglass box.
No.
It's a little Tykes box on,
It looks like a large dog
Kennel?
carrier, raised up with a run coming
On
off.
wheels.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow.
A mesh run, yeah.
but it's all preformed plastic,
Yeah.
and I could see somebody wanting to buy that,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm with you, I wouldn't want that in the historic district, but outside the
Well,
historic
that-
district, I could see somebody wanting to
Yeah.
buy that.
Mhm.
And I'm just saying, this is something, and now we could address it, if they could bring it up, I'm
When
just
they,
saying
when they
that
apply.
something like that's not a,
Randy, is that a structure? Because we're
Yeah.
talking about structures here in this
Well,
code.
it's not a permanent structure,
No,
it's on
it's
wheels.
on wheels.
not
It's
on
on
the
wheels.
foundation.
well, there's, yeah,
Oh,
that-
that one's a little different from what you showed us.
It's not a building.
Yeah, it's like a
Another one-
trampoline or
another
something.
one on
yeah, you
wheels.
can click on it,
Treehouse.
yeah.
Little chicken
I
trailer.
just like to look at everything
Oh, you
else
see that
that I
one?
looked
Like
at,
a
and I
historic
probably looked at
house.
150 pictures.
I
all
don't think
would-
your current rules
Fantastic.
control that, so.
Yeah. Although I would say, just for clarity for folks looking to build a coop, saying fully enclosed by wood or metal or similar material would probably be
That's fine.
a good
Yes.
adjustment to make.
Yeah.
You're gonna be getting
Or you
chicken
could just
feeds
say
all the time.
it needs to be able to
That is
control the
$1,200.
chickens. That's what you're really looking at. They cannot have access to the outside.
They can't go
without-
on the sidewalk?
What?
With a leash.
They get on the bus.
All right.
I would say that because they go in there at night and in bad weather, I think it's more of a
It's a protection.
protected, so you would want something, you'd
It
want
has to
a
be
hard
solid
surface.
material. And because, like he was saying with weather, they can't take cold wind in the winter, even in their run.
You can't
You are
have
gonna
mesh
have
walls
to be
on
prepared
there.
for this. You're gonna see
Exactly.
plastic on the run. It's for the chicken safety. It has to happen. They can't handle the cold gusts. It's part of having chickens. But their coop has to be contained and sealed.
Mhm.
You don't have
Yeah,
happy chickens,
predators.
you're not happy eggs.
Predators, weather, all of the above.
Are we ready for a motion?
Unless everyone wants to see, and I kind of would prefer to have an opportunity to put all these changes in a final version and then maybe take it up at the next meeting if planning's willing to,
I'm willing to do that.
just to have
Willing to do
a
that.
clean, cohesive draft.
Okay. That's fine. You're not under the gun
No.
from council to.
And I don't think we're under the gun from Because the amount of time that it would go through council with 3 reads, there's still some delay on that.
Okay.
But I think it's important.
Generation of chickens.
I think it's important to review this and make sure it thoroughly is the way that we want it to be.
All right. Well, let's handle it that way, Dave. You can get us another report next
Get
month.
you a fresh draft next month.
And hopefully the discussion won't be as lengthy, and we'll just make a recommendation in one form or another.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
everyone.
input. This is
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah, very
Thanks for the education.
enlightening, right?
I
Yeah.
just want to say thank you to you guys for taking time with this. I think it's really important, especially with people moving to Glendale. So many people nowadays want to be able to provide for themselves to the maximum ability of themselves.
Sure.
I mean, that's why we moved to Glendale, because we could have chickens. And then this happened right after we moved. And it broke our hearts. And
Maybe we should deal with chicks and the adults too, and say you can have a maximum of 6 adults, and you can have a maximum of
When
12 adults and 6. Juveniles.
when this goes to council, because that's in the council half, I'll definitely make sure that gets
Okay.
discussed. Yeah.
I would appreciate that. Thank you guys.
Thank
Yep.
you. Have a good evening.
You too.
Thanks.
All right, let's move on to our next old business item, which is another public hearing on a proposed amendment to the historic district guidelines relating to the height of new construction in the historic district. David, once again,
Yes.
you've given us a memo. Could you give us a summary, and
Yes.
we'll take it from there?
So I'm actually going to put something up here to kind of help with conversation, not this. Okay. So we had in the code or in the guidelines currently, the language on the left is what's listed on page 42 and what we talked about at the previous meeting. The language on the right is slightly adjusted from what came out of the meeting last month, but is sort of an updated recommendation based on review and discussion of the zoning code and how it meets up with the guidelines. Three big changes. Of course, 1.5 to 2.5 stories. Removal of the at street level grade requirement, which was both of those things were discussed at the previous meeting. The other change is the change from shall to should, as these are guidelines that it would kind of necessitate the recommendation rather than requirement. The circulated a memo along with the chicken memo related to this, and had a pretty interesting experience researching and investigating how the guidelines interact with our zoning code, and found that specifically to new construction, based on the current language of our zoning code, I do not believe that the guidelines explicitly apply to new construction. Now, that's not to say Planning Commission has no recourse for new construction review. The design requirements listed under the code are 7 items that are very, very clear limitations on new construction that are reviewed and enforced by the Planning Commission. But as far as the actual Green Book has any application, or at least any, say, authority over new construction review, found little to no substantiation in the code for that. Walk you through how I got to that conclusion, because it is kind of out of the box, I would say. In 1993, Council passed an ordinance amending Chapter 154 of the Zoning Code. It established the first process for historic review for applications. There were 2 sections within 154.46. The first was, or there were 2 sections that I'm going to discuss. That was a multi-section ordinance. The first is Section D, which read design requirements for other buildings. That was 7 categories of design requirements under that preservation ordinance. Those were very clear, very objective measurements of this, this property is in compliance, is not in compliance. And then there's just the It's just the one on that one. But when you go to the revision in 2001, there were two changes to 154.46 that were added at that point when the new guideline, when the existing guidelines were created and adopted. The first was under 154.46B3, titled Design Guidelines. It actually required the GPHPC to, quote, supplement the design requirements listed in the following sections by issuing design guidelines. It goes on to say that the guidelines are meant, quote, meant to assure that any alteration, demolition, or removal of landmarks, historic sites, and pivotal or contributing buildings preserves and protects the historic character of the entire historic district. The next change was an amendment to that previously mentioned 154.46D, design requirements for new buildings. Those design requirements from the original version of D remained, but they were now assigned to new buildings. Worth mentioning here is the previous section, not the previous version, but the previous section C, reads design requirements and guidelines for existing buildings, pivotal structures, et cetera, et cetera. There is a separation between requirements and guidelines on the previous section for existing buildings, and there is no mention of the guidelines in the design requirements for new buildings. On top of that, the actual definition or description of the guidelines does not indicate new buildings as something that are regulated by those guidelines. The code is written in a way that does not include new buildings as something that is subject to those guidelines. So, all that being said, because I believe that the guidelines are limited in their applicability to landmarks, historic sites, and pivotal or contributing buildings, I would argue that making a change to suggested guidelines for new construction is, I don't want to say meaningless, but ineffective. It has no influence on the review of a new building application. That includes homes, that includes accessory structures, garages, any kind of new structure in the historic district. Now, I will say the guidelines are an excellent resource for anyone looking to do new construction. They have a lot of information about architectural styles, things that are common or preferred in the village, in the historic district. So, not arguing that they should be ignored, but rather for planning's review, the 7 requirements listed under .46D are the essentially the only review avenue for planning commission under the existing version of the code. So
David, my question is, have we been operating the way you're stating it should be in the future?
In a manner of speaking, yes. I did not review every new building application since 2004 when these changes were made. But I'm thinking back to a couple of more recent ones that were either approved or denied for various reasons. One denial in particular stands out. I'm sure everyone knows 20 West Fountain, remembers that. That was not denied because of anything within the guidelines. The denial of that application was based on the square footage of the proposed home versus the square footage of an adjacent pivotal structure, which is one of those 7 design requirements, that it cannot exceed that footprint. So, in so much that planning might have used the guidelines to review new buildings in the past, I think for denials, recent denials, I do not feel like there's any potential conflict there. I think that relying on those guidelines, as planning did with the most recent denial, was the correct legal course of action for that review.
Maybe I didn't ask my question succinctly enough. Because what I hear you saying is, other than those 7 requirements, we shouldn't have any other input, and that includes the height. So somebody could come with a new building, and it could be 3 stories tall, and as long as it wasn't adjacent to another historic structure, we would have nothing. We couldn't reject it.
So I would say no on 2 counts. The first being that our zoning code has the 2.5 story limitation in it anyway, and that is completely divorced from historic district or new building or any of that.
So that covers the entire.
That it covers the
It has
entire
a
village.
maximum height also, right?
What's that?
It also has a maximum height
Yes,
of
35 feet.
35.
I think it's 35.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other kind of the other sidebar to that is, as it was mentioned at the last meeting, if you have enough setback, you can go higher. But they're very rare that that's the case. But the 2.5 story, 35 feet measurement is applies to all construction, all new construction. Additionally, under these design requirements, the first one is scale and massing, which talks about overall height to width ratios, footprint size, roof pitch, et cetera, et cetera. So I think planning has avenues within the existing 7 requirements to review scale and massing. But as far as the guidelines are concerned, they based on the current code draft, they don't have any applicability to new construction.
The guidelines are
Well,
just that, aren't they? Aren't they just,
Actually,
they're not.
Well, they are,
They're not.
but in the way the code is written, the differentiation between landmarks, pivotal or contributing buildings have the guidelines that are meant to assure that essentially the historic character is preserved of those specific kinds of structures. As far as, and then so that uses that as a resource for those buildings. The way that the code is written for new buildings, the guidelines are not mentioned.
well, actually, they are mentioned in that 154-46D1 in that paragraph on scale and massing. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line, it says as appearance including that which is outlined in the historic preservation guidelines. And I think in C, I think design requirements and guidelines for existing landmarks, probably and guidelines should not be there because they're not contained within the code. And in the first section of 154-46A, you could read it as no construction shall be undertaken prior to obtaining a certificate of appropriateness. So I think it is covered.
So I think that at best, there's just conflicting, kind of frankly messy language here with the way the code is currently drafted. Mentioning the guidelines when the guidelines in the section that defines them does not mention new construction.
Which section? are you
That
talking
is 154 or 46B B3, where it reads, the guidelines are meant to assure that any alteration, demolition, or removal of landmarks, historic sites, and pivotal or contributing buildings. This does not mention new construction.
about? Well, that is sloppy.
So I would say that while they might be outlined in the historic guidelines, they are still regulated. New buildings are still regulated by that scale and massing requirement. I would agree, Beth, with what you've said about removing guidelines from that header of C. The guidelines should inform the direction of planning commission in the way that I understand them, just watching the commission work.
Yeah.
As far as the design requirements are concerned, I think those are very clear items that specifically outline these are the things that we will review an application against. And then the guidelines help to inform that, the exercise of that review. I'm not arguing that they shouldn't apply to new construction. I would say that also. They're like I said before, they're very informative. It's a very informative document that should be utilized. But the way the code is currently written, changing language about new construction is not going to have too much of an impact.
Let me state, I disagree with you, David. I do agree with Beth that the guidelines apply to new construction. And I'm not faulting you. We've had this discussion earlier today. So I appreciate your thorough review of getting into the minutia of the language. But I disagree. And I think that we're safe in our previous decisions that might have been based on the guidelines are
I agree
safe.
because they're based on the requirements.
Yeah, I think the safer course, though, is to take two paths here. One is to ask our law director if she agrees with your interpretation or with our interpretation, and if she agrees with yours, then we would immediately have start the process of amending the text of 154.46 relative to certificates of appropriateness as they relate to the guidelines, to make sure it's crystal clear that the guidelines do apply to everything going on in the district, not just the pivotal and other structures that you mentioned, but
I
certainly
agree.
the new construction. So I'd like to have that on our plate next month, you know, sooner rather than later. If in fact
I think it's.
the law director agrees with you as opposed to us.
I think having the solicitor review this ordinance, just given it's been a number of years. The last time the guidelines were updated was 2016, and that was a few very specific changes related to windows and updating addresses for like the Ohio History Connection, those sorts of things. I think that a good, thorough review of the applicability and enforceability of this section of the code is just good exercise. And I think that if we can find, and I think there is a very clear way, and to spell out that these apply to all planning commission reviews, regardless of whether it's a new building or whatever it is. I mean, within.
Well, yeah, that's easy language to put in there.
I think that verifying that that's the case and writing language that is clearly interpreted that way is just good practice, regardless of whose side the solicitor ends up on.
Yeah.
Right.
So I feel like I'm putting
With
a dog
less
out
urgency,
between
if she agrees with us, but at the same time, it makes sense to.
I think
clarify.
for planning commission to have an ongoing, very firm authority and review here, just having her review the language is a good practice.
Is a story ever defined?
I think it is in our code.
I don't recall if it is.
So you
But
could have,
you could set a
you could
foot
have
maximum.
12-foot ceilings, 12-foot ceilings,
Yeah, it's defined.
and
A 12-foot gable, and you'd be at 36, and then you'd be
Well,
too tall. 'cause
You'd be
it's
a
thir-
foot too
There's
tall.
a height limit of 35
Yeah.
feet,
But
Mhm.
so.
So,
Yeah,
Well,
and so
we're not gonna have any more 16-foot high buildings, rooms anymore.
Stories.
David, but the other part of it is the practical point of anybody who uses the green book,
Mhm.
the guidelines, that ought to line up with the
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah, absolutely. The zoning code says 2.5 stories.
yeah.
The fact that guidelines say anything different, I think, lends more towards a,
Confusion.
what's the word I want to use? Not disharmonious,
Inconsistency.
unharmonious, or
Inconsistent.
thank you, inconsistent
Yeah.
construction in the historic district to have 2.5 story houses and then I can only go 1.5 here. So
Okay.
Right.
I agree. I agree.
Right, I don't think that was ever the
And
intent.
that street level
Right.
grade was
Right.
eliminated just because it wasn't needed.
I think because it's just, where else are you going to measure it from?
Right. I move we defer to next month.
Well, let me
What do
hear
you need?
from anybody in the audience before we
Okay.
form our opinion. Anyone in the audience wish to address any of the issues we just discussed? Before we entertain that motion, I would suggest we go ahead and make a recommendation on, as far as this language goes, take care of it now.
Okay.
Because that's the guidelines. Well, the bigger discussion is around the zoning ordinance itself.
Okay.
All right, so I move that we change the language in the guidelines referring to height for new construction to any new construction should not exceed 2.5 stories in height.
I'll- Motion second. Any further discussion?
I'm sorry, is this specific to that wording?
The recommendation in the motion is for that new wording, yes, yes. All right, no further discussion from members of the commission. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I would actually like to make a motion that we direct David to consult with the law director about the need to amend the zoning ordinance relative to the guidelines and new construction generally, or specifically, but also the general application of the guidelines throughout the appropriateness section. And if in fact she agrees with you that you, David Lumsden, draft some language that we put on our agenda for next month by way of a public hearing. And if she agrees with us, there's less urgency to that amendment, that series of amendments, but I would like to get that pursued.
Yeah, I think I'll still have draft language if
Okay.
it's, and then planning can decide whether to move forward.
Okay. Was my motion clear? Becky?
I think so.
All right.
Let's see.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Further discussion? Anyone in the audience discuss that motion? Members of the commission? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Okay.
Motion carries. You got some homework, David.
Just a bit.
All right, that concludes our action items for this evening, this evening. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the commission on any other item? Mr. Kilgore?
I'm sorry, I just came upon this. And I'll hold it for discussion later, just to present it to you. But you can build according to the main restrictions on height that we just discussed, 2.5 stories and 35 feet. You could build a 60-story, a 60-foot tall building to the ridge.
Okay.
So
Well,
on a gable
yeah.
structure, the measurement of height is to the midpoint from eave to ridge. That's 35 feet, and then you got half the gable slope beyond that.
Okay. Well, that, that's gotta be read in connection with we have a maximum height of buildings.
35
It's
feet.
2.5 stories or 35 feet?
That's right.
So the definition of height, building height,
Mhm.
for a gable structure is to the midpoint of the slope of the roof.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we just have to fix the
If
peak.
you have a 10-foot story, and then the rest of it gable height to the maximum, if you go 25 feet from the eave to the midpoint of the roof, therefore another 25 feet to the ridge adds up to 60.
Why would you do that?
That'd be a bit of an odd.
Yeah.
And then the first design requirement talks about height to width ratio, and then you just go,
Yeah.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, I absolutely agree, but there's some,
All right. Anything else? Anyone else? Is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Okay.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Good job, everyone.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank